China's navy has threatened its neighbors, and they are turning to the BrahMos for protection. The warship killer. This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
The Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China withdraws, Pakistan military withdraws from Balochistan and give Baloch complete authority to decide for themselves.
The Baloch feel that if they don't act now, they will become marginalized.
What lies ahead for Balochistan?
Balochistan, Bangladesh 2.0, streaming now.
देखिए यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड के बारे में तो बाबा साहब अम्बेडकर ने कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली में जो डिबेट हुई ये तो उसी समय लागू हो गया होगा.
At that time, Dr. Ambedkar thought it will be optional. It was never to be imposed.
जो डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल ऑफ स्टेट पॉलिसी है उसके सेक्शन उसकी धारा जो 44 है उसी में इस बात का जिक्र है. द स्टेट विल एंडेवर टू इम्प्लीमेंट कॉमन सिविल कोड.
Article 44 of the Constitution says that we shall endeavor. So what does it mean? Right now we are not ready. We shall endeavor in some time in future. Nothing has been done over it and no consensus has been built.
Can it be argued that the directive principles of state policy, where Uniform Civil Code exists in Article 44, is bad for Indian citizens? Can the Constitution be bad for a set of citizens? No, it's a package. The Constitution in its entirety has been adopted. You don't have a choice as a citizen to say, I like Part 3, which are fundamental rights. I don't like Part 4, which is directive principles of state policy. So let me ask a question. Our Constitution, we all became Indian citizens. Through the Constitution, we are all equal before law, Article 14. We all are given the freedom of speech and expression, of life and liberty, protection of life and liberty.
Article 25 is fundamental right. It will endanger their rights to to propagate their religious
Welcome. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Our big focus on the show today is on China and its economy. Let's get started. For a while now, analysts have been pointing out that all is not well with the Chinese economy. And with every passing day, more data emerges, reinforcing that perception. In the latest such development, China has slipped into deflation. Factory gate prices fell in July as the world's second largest economy struggled to revive demand, and pressure mounted for Beijing to release more direct policy stimulus. And now there is growing anxiety that China is entering an era of much slower economic growth, similar to the period of Japan's lost decades, which saw consumer prices and wages stagnate for an entire generation. A stark contrast to the rapid inflation seen elsewhere. China's post-pandemic recovery has slowed after a brisk start in the first quarter of this fiscal as demand at home and abroad weakened. The consumer price index dropped 0.3% year-on-year in July, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. The producer price index declined for a 10th consecutive month, down 4.4%. China is the first G20 economy to report a year-on-year decline in consumer prices in the last 2 years. Asian shares were on the defensive on Wednesday as the Chinese price data confirmed that its economic recovery was losing steam. This data came a day after trade figures showed that China's exports and imports both slumped as well in the month of July. Now let's take a look at the data in some detail. The average consumer price inflation in China over the year was just 0.5%, far trailing the government's target average inflation rate of 3%, highlighting the growing divergence between expectations and the ground reality. Beijing's gross domestic product growth target of 5% for 2023, the lowest in decades, was originally seen as cautious, but months of consistently weak data have fueled wider pessimism over the growth outlook. The Chinese economy expanded just about 0.8% between the first and second quarters of the year, and data published on Tuesday showed July exports slumped 14.5% year-on-year, the steepest fall since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, imports declined 12.4% year-on-year. That's the biggest fall since January. Experts say these numbers are a reflection of lower purchasing power and weak consumer confidence. So just what is deflation? Simply put, deflation is a phenomenon when both consumer prices and asset prices decrease over time. It is, of course, by definition, the exact opposite of inflation when prices of goods soar across the economy. An economy that witnesses deflation usually highlights the country's impending recession and hard economic times. When people see that prices are set to make a free fall, they delay purchases in the hope of buying things at lower prices at a later time. This, however, translates to lower income for producers, which in turn leads to higher interest rates and unemployment. Some say China, which witnessed a major economic boom soon after it ended its zero-COVID policy last year, has now lost all its momentum. Imports shrinking by 12.5% in July highlight the country's tumbling domestic demand. The international demand for Chinese goods also has seen a downward trend owing to the threat of recession in the United States and Europe. And that is not the only bad news for China. Youth unemployment in the world's second largest economy has reached alarming levels. In fact, it is at an all-time high. Government figures peg it at 21%, but some estimates suggest it could actually be as high as 46.5% thanks to fake jobs and 16 million workers lying flat. Let me explain. China's newest entrants to the workforce have been struggling with a very difficult job market for several years. But since COVID, the situation has deteriorated dramatically. While even the official statistics paint a grim picture, the ground reality could be far worse. That's because China calculates its unemployment rate by including only people who are actively seeking jobs, as opposed to the United States, where those available for work are also counted. Therefore, the true unemployment rate in China could be as high as 46.5%. There are 16 million young Chinese workers who've essentially taken themselves out of the labor market, something known as lying flat, and therefore they're not being counted in the unemployment statistics. Now, similar to the quiet quitting movement in the US, Chinese youth have taken to lying flat or doing the bare minimum and adopting a minimalist lifestyle as a way to reject the societal pressure to overwork in China. And here's what is both intriguing and worrying. The youth unemployment rate has surged so much that some Chinese parents have turned to unusual solutions, including paying their adult children to be full-time children. Yes, that's what they're calling it these days in China. That's essentially because for millions of China's young college graduates, the lack of attractive career opportunities is now a devastating reality. There is a complete misalignment between the skills that college graduates have acquired through higher education and the skills required by employers. Given this situation, President Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China are calling on the young and educated Chinese to take on blue-collar jobs that they might be overqualified for and urging them to actively seek hardship. Colleges are advising graduates not to be too picky about jobs, not to aim too high, as the opportunities are fleeting. In its attempt to reduce the unemployment rate for college graduates, the Education Ministry has warned that any college courses that have employment rates lower than 60% for 2 years in a row could be cancelled. And that pressure has led to some schools to force graduates to falsify their employment records, according to some media reports. And now the Education Ministry has begun cracking down on universities for falsifying employment records as part of a sweeping investigation into the accuracy of employment data. So all in all, it does look like things are rather grim for China at the moment. All right. For a wider perspective on that big story, we're now joined by Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News 9. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Global Lens. Shri, great to have you on the show. Let's look at China's economic crisis in two parts. You know, we're talking about some recently released data that seems to paint a grim picture, and then there is the unemployment story, which seems to be rather alarming. We'll get to the unemployment bit in just a moment, but first let's focus on some of the other worrying data that has come out, whether it is imports and exports that were found to have slumped significantly in the month of July, or the fact that China has now slipped into deflation. There are many who would say, Shri, that deflation is a first sure shot sign that an economy is at the very least nearing a slowdown, if not a full blown recession. Do you think that's where things stand currently as far as China's economy is concerned?
Right. So Neha, to understand what's really going on in China, we need to take a step back and look at what China is doing internally to its economic growth. There are two parts to it. One is what the party, the Communist Party, is trying to do internally with its growth approach, so to say. And second is the external environment, which is the export demand, which China caters to in a very large, significant fashion. So let's start by looking at what has China done internally, which is maybe has worked like hitting the brakes on the Chinese growth. So the first thing which Xi Jinping did last year when he looked at the entire growth of China going forward is to say that he wants to focus on high quality growth, which is their new economic development pattern, as they called it. So this new high quality growth means no longer will China build unproductive assets in infrastructure and real estate, which was artificially inflating the GDP and showing a higher growth. Instead, Xi Jinping wanted the internal consumer demand, which is the domestic demand from within China, and then the export demand, which is from the rest of the world, to drive the growth. So this, what I call, is some sort of economic reset, which China has very consciously done to actually arrive at a healthier and a normal rate of growth. For a economy of $16 trillion, it's not possible to keep growing at 8 to 10% year on year. There's only so much consumption that can happen or so much infrastructure you can build. Already we know that China is facing the problem of overbuilt infrastructure. You have built homes that no one's occupying. You have built highways which no one is using. So these are all unproductive investment, which Xi Jinping now is very clear. He's not going to mandate GDP growth. He's saying we will let the real economy play and the real consumer demand and the export demand determine how fast China grows. So that is number one. And also along that, alongside what they have done is they have gone after some large businesses, especially in the tech industry, which again is a more political nature rather than pure business. So a lot of factors have come together to ensure that the slowdown happens. Of course, COVID was a very big factor. And there was a sharp jump which China witnessed after COVID. But again, things are now settling down to what ought to be a normal and a healthier sort of a growth for China. So the other part that you talked about, Neha, is the joblessness and especially among the youth. Now, again, it's very interesting. China is always like a mystery box. You have to unpeel it to understand what's really going on. So what's happening is China is graduating a phenomenal number of students every year. In fact, between 2019 to now, the numbers have gone up by almost 50%, from roughly 8 million to about roughly 12 million. Now, the challenge is not that jobs per se are not available. What's happening is that the kind of jobs that students want, that they expect, the engineers, for example, want, are not available. So hence Xi Jinping's call that don't be afraid to go and do some blue collar work is essentially a sign of the fact that the expectation that China's graduates have in terms of the kind of work they should be doing. For example, if I'm an engineer, the question is, why will I go to, let's say, a mall and work as a customer service manager or a customer service agent on a shop floor of any shop, or even go to a call center and work as a telemarketing executive? So these are questions that China's youngsters are asking. And what you mentioned about lie flat or the quiet quitting that we're witnessing in China has also been enabled by the fact that because for long, China followed this one child policy. And because of that, now you have a lot of families which are reasonably affluent, and their children are now, have the luxury of waiting it out till they find a job that they want, and parents don't mind supporting them. So that's the whole phenomenon. So it's both economic and social phenomenon which China is experiencing at this point, Neha.
It is very interesting, and at the same time it does sound very worrying, considering that we're talking about the second largest economy in the world, and given the population of China, we're talking about a humongous number of young people who are either on the lookout for suitable jobs or simply unable to find them. It's clearly not just a problem of unemployment, it's also a problem of underemployment. Now, let's look at some of these statistics, which are quite staggering. According to the government figures, Sri, youth unemployment, which means we are looking at people who are between the ages of 16 and 24. According to the government, youth unemployment is pegged somewhere around 21%. But there are analysts who point out that in reality, this could be as high as 46.5%, because as you mentioned, there are many who feel that they are simply not getting jobs that are, in a sense, in sync with their skills.
Absolutely.
And the result is that 16 million individuals have decided to just, in a sense, take themselves out of the labor force, so they're not even being included in the unemployment statistics. And I don't think I have heard of any other country in the world where adult children are being paid by their parents to be quote unquote full-time children. While some of it, Shri, may be attributable to the affluence of these families, as you just mentioned, but looking at the big picture, this should actually worry the Chinese government a lot.
Absolutely. Unemployed youth is something no country wants, Neha, because these can potentially become social issues which then go on to disturb the political fabric of the country. And China is very, very cautious about that. It doesn't want any issues socially that can disrupt the political system that exists in China today. So that's the reason why Xi Jinping is forcing all these youngsters to go get any job, even if it's a blue collar job, just go be busy, because as we know, idle mind is also a devil's workshop. So from joblessness, it might spill into the streets with children start protesting, and then it becomes a bigger societal problem. So that's something Xi Jinping wants to avoid. But talking about children, staying with their parents or being funded by parents to do nothing, well, even in the US, we briefly witnessed a phase where we had these so-called boomerang babies, as we call them, like children of baby boomers coming back home without a job, staying with their parents, living in the basement, since most US homes have basement. So that was a phenomenon that was happening, but there was a passing phase. And as we now know, unemployment in the US is at a historic low. There aren't enough people to fill jobs. So it does happen, but given the sheer scale that China has in terms of its people, like I said, graduating almost 12 million graduates every year, it's a phenomenal number. So unless these people are, given jobs, or they're given jobs that they think they deserve, China will end up with a societal problem sooner than later, Neha.
You're quite right. There is a very strong societal dimension to this, not just an economic one. One wonders how the United States is viewing these developments as far as the Chinese economy is concerned, because remember, there is this great superpower rivalry between the two countries on multiple fronts, including obviously the economic front. But more importantly, Shri, when Xi Jinping says, or when the Communist Party of China says to the Chinese people, brace yourselves for some tough measures that will need to be taken in the months ahead, what do you think they're really referring to? What do you think the Chinese people are really looking at? What is it that they need to brace themselves for in the weeks and months ahead?
Right. So, Neha, we already talked about deflation in China, which means that the consumer demand is softening and hence prices are holding or they are actually coming down, right? So, which means that consumer spending in China is going down and people are less certain about the future. And the fact that jobs are also not being created is indicative of the lack of confidence that businesses have in the future of China's economy. So they don't expect to grow as fast as they have grown in the past. So that is the reason why businesses are not creating new jobs, because the moment you hire youngsters, you hire graduates, you also have to train them. You can't just put them to work. You have to spend 3 months, 6 months training people. So it's indicative of an overall softness that the economy is going to go through. And if the recession in Germany, if the softness, the US Fed here is very, very intent on hitting its inflation target of 2%. So if that happens, it will necessarily mean that the other markets to which China caters to, Europe, US, those markets are also going to become soft. Therefore, it's going to be a double whammy for China in some sense, where the domestic market is softening and then the global market to which it caters to is also beginning to soften. So this is essentially what the government in China is wanting its people to buckle up for harder times ahead. Neha.
Buckle up for harder times ahead. Shri, final question to you on this subject before we move on, which is that, for months now, economic experts around the world have been warning that there is a recession coming, a global recession. Some of them have painted a very, very grim and dark picture and have gone to the extent of saying it could be as bad as, or perhaps even worse than, the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, looking at what's happening with the Chinese economy at the moment, do you think this, in a sense, foreshadows, some sort of larger global economic trouble, call it what you like, a slowdown, or a global recession that is sooner or later going to be upon us? I mean, Europe, for example, is already struggling. I mean, in the winter, for example, the energy crisis that we saw in many parts of Europe was unprecedented.
That's true, Neha. So there is no doubt that the overall global economic growth is softening, and the fact that US, despite so many rate hikes by the Fed, hasn't actually tipped over into recession in itself is a remarkable story. But a lot of people are asking, how long is that going to happen? Because the US Fed does seem very committed to its inflation target, and the federal governor has said that he will do whatever it takes to ensure that the rates remain under control. So even if that means tipping the economy into recession, they're willing to do it. So if US goes into recession, and then you have China, which is slowing down, Germany is already in recession. So then we are looking at a world which is, somewhere close to recession, if not technically. Definitely growth is slowing, and it's only a matter of time before, let's say, a big economy actually goes into recession, and then the rest of the world follows into some sort of a recessionary mode, Neha.
Well, yes, that certainly does paint a worrying picture. We'll have to wait and see how things pan out on a global scale, but clearly these are not good times for the Chinese economy, and China does have a lot to worry about on that front. Shri, stay on with us. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Let's now move on to Pakistan. Why are we talking about Pakistan on Global Lens today? Well, that's because Pakistan's parliament, known as the National Assembly, has been, for all practical purposes, dissolved today, paving the way for a technocrat-led interim government to oversee the next general election, one that will not see the participation of the high-profile former Prime Minister and Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chairman Imran Khan. The country has been in political turmoil since Khan was booted out of power in April last year. And just last week, he was jailed in a corruption case, sentenced to 3 years in prison and barred from politics for 5 years. This followed a months-long crackdown on his party, the PTI. Now, as per the constitution, elections in Pakistan should be held within 90 days of parliament's dissolution, but the outgoing government has said polls are likely to be delayed on account of a pending delimitation exercise. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif today announced the dissolution of the National Assembly 3 days before the term of the lower house of parliament was scheduled to end. According to the constitution, the assembly will stand dissolved formally once the president signs the notification issued by the government. However, if for some reason the president does not sign the notification, the assembly will automatically dissolve after 48 hours of the president receiving the prime minister's notification. Now, Shehbaz Sharif has told members of the ruling party, the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, that a final round of discussions with allies will begin on Friday for a decision on the caretaker setup. This process is expected to take at least 3 days. It would be followed by the appointment of a caretaker prime minister. Once the name is finalized, Sharif will submit the chosen candidate's name to the president. In the event of a failure to reach an agreement within the stipulated time frame, the responsibility will then shift to the Election Commission of Pakistan to nominate a caretaker prime minister from the proposed names. The unlikely coalition between Pakistan's feuding dynastic parties headed by Shehbaz Sharif came together, remember, to oust Imran Khan from power last year. But political observers say that the coalition has won very little popular support during these 18 months that it's been at the helm of affairs. Now, the Pakistan economy is still in the doldrums despite a new International Monetary Fund bailout, with crippling foreign debt, soaring inflation and widespread unemployment, with factories made idle because they lack foreign currency to buy raw materials. Besides, there is a question mark over the election dates. There has been speculation for months that there could be a delay in holding elections as the current establishment struggles to stabilize the country, which is facing overlapping security, economic and political crises. Data from the latest census that was carried out in May was finally published last weekend, and the government says the Election Commission needs time to redraw constituency boundaries and therefore elections will be delayed. Now, this is clearly a sore point for several political parties. And while uncertainty over when the elections will be held continues, Imran Khan, as we said, will be out of action. Khan enjoyed genuine widespread support when he came to power in 2018 with the blessings of the country's powerful army generals, whom he later fell out with. He later waged a risky campaign of defiance against the military, accusing them of meddling in politics, even naming an intelligence officer and holding him responsible for the assassination attempt on him. Imran Khan heaped pressure on the Shehbaz Sharif government to hold early elections by holding mass rallies in different parts of the country and even pulling his MPs from parliament. But ultimately, his gambit failed. Khan was hit with more than 200 legal cases. Over the weekend, he was convicted in one of those corruption cases and sent to jail and disqualified from contesting elections for a period of 5 years. Khan maintains the charges are all politically motivated and designed to prevent him from contesting elections. But what does this really mean for Pakistan, for its polity, for its democracy, for the upcoming elections and for Imran Khan and his party? Let's get a perspective from Shri. Let's go back to Shri, who is with us live from Washington, D.C. Shri, of course, it was known for several days now that the National Assembly of Pakistan would be formally dissolved. The question now would be dissolved today. That's happened. But the question really is, what happens next? The government has been accused by the opposition of buying time, dilly-dallying, saying the Election Commission needs more time to prepare for the elections, which means the elections may not be held within the stipulated time period of 90 days. How do we expect things to pan out? Yes, there's going to be a caretaker government. There's been speculation that the outgoing finance minister could in fact be appointed the interim prime minister. But how do you see things panning out? And as long as uncertainty over the time frame of the elections persists, do you think there is likely to be further political chaos and turmoil in Pakistan?
Oh, absolutely. I think even darker days and what the country is experiencing at the moment are ahead for Pakistan, Neha. Why do I say that? I say that based on certain very obvious moves which the outgoing Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif has made. One, of course, was the whole the census, which has forced now the Election Commission to basically go into a delimitation mode without which it cannot actually conduct elections. So the Election Commission itself has said it's going to need 4 weeks. So like as you pointed out, four months. So 4 months is 120 days, which is much more than the 90 days mandate, which Constitution says within which a government should be election should be held and government formed. So that is number one. Second, before going, Shahbaz Sharif has also tightened the Official Secrets Act, which gives the powerful military in Pakistan even greater power to haul up anyone they feel like. Although it's a different matter that it could come back and bite even PDM, the government or the party which has actually strengthened the act. So this means that the going is going to be far greater, more difficult for Pakistan. And I personally don't think there is any plan to actually hold elections this year. Now, let's look at what's happened. Like explain the process, there has to be an interim prime minister who needs to be appointed to keep the government running, and also whose principal job actually will be to make sure that fair and transparent elections are held in Pakistan. So now with Pakistan PTI, which is Imran Khan's party, out of the picture, there's only a jumla of the coalition parties which is there, and it's hard to imagine that these parties will elect someone as an interim prime minister who's going to ensure free and fair elections in Pakistan within this year. That is number one. Number two, I also see this move, this state of limbo in Pakistani politics, strengthening the hands of military once again. So what will happen is you might have a nominal a government which is on the face of it democratically elected, but the real power will once again move back to the military, the generals in the Pakistan army. And that's something which Imran Khan and his party was fighting very hard against. So we are now looking at a scenario where Pakistan goes back to being controlled by the military and not so much by a democratically elected government, Neha.
Certainly, and you know, for a long time, or let's say since the very beginning, the very manner in which Pakistan conducts its elections, frankly, has been called into question. We all know the most powerful institution in that country is the military, even though Pakistan loves to call itself.
In fact, just to your point, Neha,
yes.
You know, Shahbaz Sharif and the whole party came together on the basis that the elections which Imran Khan won were not fair, they were not genuine.
Exactly.
So, you know, to your point, that's exactly how it works in Pakistan.
Absolutely, the delicious irony of it all, and which is why, you know, Imran Khan has been accused of hypocrisy and double standards, because he was propped up by the military. And it's only when he fell out with the military that he started talking about their interference in Pakistan politics. And one would ask, when did the Pakistan military not meddle in Pakistan politics? I mean, they have always been the power behind the throne. But let's now focus for a momentary on the man who has grabbed the most headlines emanating from Pakistan over the last few years, Imran Khan. Some would say, never write off Imran Khan, the man's a survivor. But now he's behind bars, serving the 3-year jail sentence, and has been effectively barred from contesting an election for a period of 5 years. Do you believe that this is pretty much the end of the road for Imran Khan? Is it the end of his political and electoral career? And if the answer to that is yes, did his gamble really backfire? You know, not just the constant pressure that he put on the government to hold early elections, but taking on the all-powerful military. It seems to have cost him dear, and very likely his entire political career.
So in Pakistan, Neha, just because you've been convicted or even put behind bars doesn't mean anything. It doesn't end your political career. So I'll come to Imran Khan in a bit, but let's talk about Mr. Nawaz Sharif. I think he may be the future Prime Minister of Pakistan.
In fact, his
if
brother
things
has
go
said
this
so.
way.
Yes, the outgoing
Yeah.
PM has said so.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he has, he put himself in an exile. He's in London, sitting there, waiting his time out because of the cases against him. So in Pakistan, these cases actually don't mean anything because once you're back in power or you're in a position to influence the entire system, you can get rid of these cases. That's not a thing. And in Imran's case, I think their intention is to appeal both the cases and the ban on his political entry with the Supreme Court. So let's see how that goes. But there is no doubt that at the moment, Imran Khan is probably the most popular politician in Pakistan, and it remains to be seen what PDM does in the interim. Let's say from now till the next elections happen, how do they break up Imran Khan's party? They have already put pressure on a lot of the party leaders, and they've been forced to go underground. And Imran himself appeal to his supporters to say that don't do anything which gets you in jail. So he wants to keep the party alive. So that's something which his opponents will want to do, which is to break up the party, make sure that the key party members are either put in prison or they go into hiding, so they're not able to do anything. So a lot depends on how the people in PTI, in Imran Khan's party, are able to keep the momentum going, and what the Supreme Court in Pakistan says about his ban on competing elections and the conviction from which the ban itself emanates, Neha.
Before we wrap up, I'm going to put you on the spot, Sri. Stick your neck out for us. There is a lot of time between now and when the election takes place in Pakistan. A lot can happen in politics in the subcontinent, as we know, in even a few days. Do you believe that the next election in Pakistan is going to be without Imran Khan contesting, or do you believe that the jury on that is still out?
It's hard to say how that happens, but you asked when will the elections be held. I think if I were you, I'd keep an eye on the flights out of Heathrow and the manifesto list, the passenger manifesto. If there is a name that appears on the passenger manifest saying Nawaz Sharif booked from London to Islamabad or Lahore, then I know that elections are around the corner in Pakistan. So that would be the big clue, Neha. If Nawaz Sharif ends his self-imposed exile and takes a one-way ticket to Pakistan, we know that elections are around the corner. And if that happens, then it probably means that Imran Khan is not in the picture.
Very interesting. So clearly, Nawaz Sharif's imminent return to Pakistan is going to signal when those elections are really going to take place. Well, it is very likely, as Sri mentioned, that Nawaz Sharif could very well be the next Prime Minister of Pakistan. On that note, Sri, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. with that perspective on those two big stories on Global Lens.
My pleasure.
All right, time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere, there's plenty more on the other side.
ChatGPT. It can generate codes and human-like responses through text.